Good evening. I'm Brian Butler from the Philosophy Department. Happy to welcome you to the 7th Annual Door Lecture on Art and Aesthetics. This year, we are honored to have as our Door Lecturer a world-renowned composer, writer, conceptual artist, and theorist. Paul Miller, also known as DJ Spooky, that Subliminal Kid. I see him as a particularly appropriate lecturer for the area. His work clearly relates to such honored locals as Charles Olson, Robert Moog, John Cage, and Robert Rauschenberg. Further, the Emersonian tones found in his work exemplify a profound picture of the creative process, one with wide-ranging implications in such areas as originality, identity, and copyright law. Without further ado, Paul Miller.
Hey, what's up, everybody? How you doing? Hello, hello.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I'd like to know.
Are you ready for start time? Well, let me tell you things, you know.
So that was just a quick collage, all right? But what makes that even more fun, let me just play you the visual version of the same thing. Because I think once you get visual, everybody kind of gets it. It's just one of those funny moments where you can hear something, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as when you see it. So here we are. I'm going to just play. So all of that was just one song. You were hearing a harmonica, the guitar chords of the original version of the Rolling Stones, but we all know that track, right? So mixing it with break beats, remixing it with dub bass lines, the whole idea there was a reinterpretation, a recontextualization. So what you're hearing is, what I like to say is an uneasy tension between context and content. So the factory production line, looking at those fragments of movement, basically what I was just doing is making, what Andy Warhol would like to call the factory. You're making a culture of copies, and the way that art functioned with people like Warhol or artists like Jeff Koons is that the way that you look at something, it carries a lot of clout. The regard, the gaze, it looks back at you. So what I like to think of when you see that production line is not only is it something that's remote, because it's not. We all drive cars, we all wear jeans, we all have Macintosh, PCs, you name it. But the production process has changed. It's been outsourced. It's been repurposed. It's been something that essentially is no longer made along the normal ways. I mean, half the components of this computer were assembled in China. The other half were designed in Silicon Valley. The rest were designed up at MIT. The software was made at Seattle. And it was all put together in one place, and now it sits here on this desktop. So it's not about one place, but about the way they all converge. So I want to play you guys a quick film, and here we go. This film is a very funny model, and it's something one of my favorite filmmakers, Méliès, made at the turn of the last century. What you're going to see here is he's made copies of himself. Here we go.
En 1900, il y a donc presque 100 ans, Méliès représente ce qu'il était réellement dans la vie, un homme orchestre.
So what's so beautiful about that piece is essentially he made copies of himself. And there's an editing technique going on there in the same way that the Rolling Stones piece I just showed made copies and edits and splices. If anybody out there is a film director, you can kind of get the idea here is that you're playing with sequencing. And the same thing happens with sound. Every track you hear when you're out at a party or when you're at home had to be edited and sequenced, whether it's on Sirius radio or whether it's something that's on your iPod playlist. There's a kind of editing process going on. So that's the vocabulary. It's the culture of the cut, where you splice and dice these elements. You're playing with sequencing and make them, again, play in context. But it's also one of those things where you have to imagine that the sample itself is part of the vocabulary. So it's like Lego blocks. You put one clip on top of the other, and next thing you know, you get a new structure. So sampling has come home to roost. It's part of everyone's vocabulary. And it's something that everything from, I'm sure you guys all heard the song Crazy, right? That's Danger Mouse as well. He's an old associate, and I enjoy seeing that kind of pop culture reflection, but also as above, so below, whether it be the remixes of Bush's speeches, the Rolling Stones, or for that matter, hearing Nas, his new single is called Hip Hop is Dead, where he's rhyming over Inagata Devita, Anybody knows that record? It's a classic. But the funny thing is more people will hear it from the Nas version than from the older version. And I like playing with these kinds of interplays with memory. So I'm going to take it back a little bit further. Behind me you have a gentleman by the name of Luigi Russolo, who had a similar situation in 1915, but with a radically different approach. editing, when sound and film, you got to think about what he called the art of noise. If anybody speaks Italian, it's called the arte di rumore. So he was one of the first people to come up with this idea of a sound system concept, and this is 1915. And again, the audiences were not feeling it. In fact, they were riots. People were like, "Where's the band?" You know, and that was a kind of a situation where basically you would have a whole bunch of guys cranking these like what they call noise generators. And the audience would get angry, and they say, you know, that they want our money back. When there's no band. Where's the music? So he essentially created this art of noise as a response to what he called the futurist manifestos of the era. Next to him is this woman named Valentine de Saint-Point. She's one of my favorite women performance artists because she was one of the first people to think about complete atmosphere. In 1913, she would project mathematical equations on her body at her performances, and she would have, each equation would have different scent. So it's meant to be kind of poems of atmosphere or poetry made of mathematics. So she would project these equations on her body, read poetry that was mathematical, like calculus and algebra and so on, and then have this kind of scent and perfume put in the air. That was pretty wild, I would imagine, right? So these kinds of avant-garde statements are now part of the way we think about art, whether it be, you know, going to Disney and being in a simulated environment, or for that matter, when you go to a band like Sonic Youth, or you hear Rage Against the Machine, or you hear all these different bands, they are the children of noise. So the art of noise, the futurist manifestos, those are something I really like to think about as, again, if you listen to Public Enemy, they have, of course, a classic track that's just simply Bring the Noise. So sound system culture, looking at turntables, looking at loudspeakers. This is, I just did a project with Trojan Records of 40 years of Jamaican music, and they gave me access to this warehouse of this huge amount of Jamaican music. And the fun part about that is they had this whole sound system culture locked down. I mean, it's brilliant because on one level or another, they had a relationship where the band was not really the core focus. In fact, it was too expensive to bring a band around. So what they would do is record instrumental versions of what they call dub plates, and then play the instrumental version and have someone rhyme over it. And this is in the late 60s, way before hip hop. But what you can see there, if you look at the relationship, you know, sound system 1915, sound system 1968, is that the Jamaican approach was what I like to call bass minimalism. What is basically happened was that people would get the instrumental, make multiple versions of an album with the same songs, but just have different vocalists. So that was vocal sampling. And what I like to think about whenever I see these kind of old Jamaican sound system things is that essentially this was a third world economy. They didn't have the luxuries of New York or London sound studios. They didn't have the luxury of being able to record multiple takes. They had to do it on the spot and have a dub played out that night. So Duke Reed helped start Trojan Records, and there's another very renowned Jamaican by the name of Chris Blackwell, who started Island Records, which I'm sure you guys know. Bands like U2 were on that, or Bob Marley was on Island. But they both come out of this kind of sound system culture. So the update on what I was just talking about with the art of noise is that this sound system is what you shape noise. You make it become both complex on one level and accessible on another. Noise is nothing but the ear's inability to assign meaning to something. It means there's noise in a system or noise on your cell phone because your ear doesn't translate the algorithms and the codes driving that. Or when you hear your computer make a sound that you don't know about, it's noise, but it's actually organized, mathematically analyzable, and it's complex. But the point is that we assign noise value to something we don't understand. So I like to look at that as a kind of indeterminacy and uncertainty, like I was saying before, between art and artifact. The noise is the system between. My film's been playing at a lot of different spots. We even got the Greek government to give me the Acropolis for an evening, which is pretty wild. About 5,000 people came to the show, and I had them put bass speakers through in the ruins. This is hip-hop, by the way, so you got to do that. And so the funny part about this is that when we were in discussion with the Greek government, they were like, why does he want to play a Ku Klux Klan film at the Acropolis? So I was kind of like, well, it's comedy, tragedy, right? Good old Greek situation. But you can see the semicircle kind of, this is original theater, you know, just, you can see the same logo in movie theaters nowadays. But the whole issue for me was not only that the original idea of theater was, you know, everyone took a role, and people would wear masks, you had comedy, tragedy, you know, all sorts of stuff. But the issue is that it was about role playing. But the thing with sampling is it's about playing with voices and being able to break voices up, sample, break voices up, take small elements of them, sample. You can hear, you know, Kanye West, or you can hear all sorts of people. But the basic idea is that that's when you hear a theater of sound. Everything is about playing with roles. So Rebirth of a Nation was kind of the core DNA of American film, but it's also a crazy racist film. It's a propaganda film for the Klan. You know, I'm sure, you know, you guys, everybody will leave here and people like DJ Spooky was talking about, you know, KKK and Greek theater, right? But no burning crosses tonight. But the whole idea is that you have to imagine this is thousands of years ago, before electricity, before amplification, before the sound system. Nowadays, because we're able to project sound and be able to create all sorts of different acoustic spaces, we would never need to even deal with that anymore. You would just have speakers around. But at that kind of theater, you would be able to whisper, and the audience would be able to hear you, whether you were in the center or on the side. That's a tremendous amount of work for acoustic architecture. So being able to put, you know, mega bass woofers in there was, you know, a fun feeling. That's all I can say. The soundtrack to my film is done with this group called the Kronos Quartet. This is a project where I was doing some practice runs with different versions of working with orchestras. This was the Oakland Symphony Orchestra, and the idea was to sample the orchestra live. And there would be times where I would play and then the orchestra would play, and you can't really tell which is which. And that's the point, it's spooky, right? So the computer is running the audience's, you know, what the audience hears, and you can see that the feeds are running to the computer, and the monitors are playing it back out to the audience. So the orchestra is about 76 people, and they're all playing different motifs and sounds that I was sampling. And that, if you were in the audience, it would sound like classical music, but all cut up and like mixed with hip hop. So you couldn't tell if it was live or the samples. And I like playing with that as a kind of, again, the original version of spooky is a very famous German term, unheimlich, which means uncanny. And the pun there is that when you see that orchestra, I could basically just walk off stage and just leave the system playing, you know? It's like me talking now, and all of a sudden I walk away and a hologram of me is standing here or something. You know, that's spooky, right? So the whole pun here is that identity and the way that the human being relates to technology at this point is that we're a very tenuous relationship to the idea of realism, and how people and places and things are represented is not necessarily going to be about reality. It's going to be about the editing of that reality, editing of that reality, the editing of that reality, and make them play in context. You're playing with sequencing. So the Bush remix versus the Rolling Stones versus sampling an entire orchestra or having a crazy KKK film play at the Acropolis, the connecting thread here and the common denominator is a sense of irreverence between context and content. This is one of my favorite architects, Le Corbusier. He worked with one of my favorite composers, Yannis Xenakis, and we did a collaboration a while ago before he passed away. That building was meant to be a series of sound waveforms, and it was, the whole idea was to kind of take the Phillips Pavilion of 1958 and have it be an acoustic resonance chamber. And they put hundreds of loudspeakers through the building. So everywhere you walked, you were able to hear the resonant frequencies of the poems and various electronic sounds in the building. It's considered to be one of the first ideas of acoustic architecture that incorporated loudspeakers as a basic part of the structure. So I love this building because it looks crazy high-tech, crazy futuristic, but also had a lot of speakers around. If you're DJing, trust me, you gotta have bass. All right. This is a project Reginald D. Smith did at MIT of hip-hop collaborations. And what he did was study how different, he made a model of the information flows between different MCs. I'm sorry it's a little blurry, but you can see Funkmaster Flex, Snoop Dogg, Jadakiss, Foxy Brown, Missy Elliott. But what happens when you reduce them to mathematical equations is that they become a kind of a grid structure, and the communication patterns between everyone becomes the algorithm. So the people who've collaborated and worked with the most amount of people, people like Method Man, Redman, Funkmaster Flex or Busta Rhymes, who appear on a lot of different albums, will have more connections, what they call nodes and networks. So this is a model of a social network. It's something where the human relations have been fostered into a kind of mathematical equation. And so what he ended up doing was studying how mathematics of communication implies not only stuff like, say, for example, Amazon.com, where they kind of study your shopping patterns and see what, you know, they call collaborative filtering occurs. If you like this, you might like that, et cetera. But that's called collaborative filtering. It's an algorithmic-driven process. But also, even phone systems and information networks are all mathematical, algorithm-driven. So what I love seeing when I look at that is not only that human beings are very complex, nested nodes and networks. Like I can imagine a map of everybody in this room if we all had connections between one of those. Hopefully those connections will be the way you guys trade mix CDs, maybe, instead of keeping them. And the collaboration there is the trade. And so everyone there is exchanging information. It's their rhymes, it's their styles, it's their way of creating poetry. And Reginald did this project for MIT. So I like to look at this as a kind of model of abstraction, when communication is both about poetry and about mathematics. Marx and Engels. By the way, I'm not communist either. But they have a great phrase that I like to sample, and that's this famous phrase that they say, essentially, all that is solid melts into air. So wireless imagination, looking at an accelerated economy and the way that people are trading files and being able to create alternative economies. Say, for example, if you're in a video game environment these days, you can get a currency and put that, even there's some video games that let you translate that to your ATM card, stuff like that. But I love this idea of alternate currencies, and that's what this gift economy is about. So it's not about, I guess, oil for the people if we're looking at Bush and Cheney, but it's about looking at trade, and that's a basic fabric of human communication. I'm going to kind of wrap up with two things here. This is about art and aesthetics, so I wanted to just pose some juxtapositions here. One of them is Man Ray, the other is John Cage and Sun Ra, the other is Wilfredo Lam, the other is Rauschenberg, and the last two are Picasso. But you can see the eerie relationship between the masks, because essentially Picasso and Man Ray quoted a lot of African art. And what's intriguing about that is that not only visually speaking is it a very beautiful relationship between European and American aesthetics, and of course black culture and its relationship to white culture and entertainment and how people relate to identity. But Rauschenberg here, actually of course he taught at the Black Mountain College, by the way, he's a very renowned artist, putting a goat in a tire, that's a remix, right? This is a gentleman who invented the term Muzak. And to me, the funny thing with Muzak is that it comes out of military systems. So you have to remember, he came back from World War I where he'd been in charge of the U.S.'s military's telegraph lines and being able to send signals like you were seeing a couple things ago, and signals like that. And he came home and he felt like you should wire all the federal offices to make the workers more efficient. Again, he's like got that factory, line mentality. So creating music that would make people work more efficiently. He also owned Kodak, so he's like music plus sound capturing a spatial image, Muzak. And what's kind of interesting with music and Muzak is that it's about quoting certain emotions. One thing with instrumental electronic music, or what they call trip hop, chill out, ambient, all that, is that it's about creating an environment. And I kind of look at the pun of that, not as looking at it as boring, like Muzak, but at the way that it creates a kind of music sense of time. And my nickname for one of my favorite professors in college is, or a poet later, the Beats, I'm sure you guys know, Amiri Baraka. He's a controversial figure, cranky old gentleman. And he's like, Paul, why is this music always repeating? And, so the funny thing with repetition is that you have to imagine it becomes about prolonged sense of time. My nickname for it is the prolonged present. So I'm going to skip back and go from Muzak to that idea of the prolonged present, prolonged present, prolonged present, prolonged present.
singing now. Whatever going on up there. If you don't, I'm going to call the cops.